Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for June 15th, 2022. Well, I'm sure you've heard the warnings. The Great Recession is on our doorstep. We could be going into a great recession. You hear this over and over and over from the financial commentators. It's in all the major media. And the warnings are that we're about to be hit by a giant increase in interest rates, and no one's quite sure what that will do. Well, it's not a recession. It's a systemic collapse that we're in the midst of that's been building for the last 50 years, but it's been speeding up since 2008. The next couple of days, there'll be meetings of central bankers from all the major central banks taking place, which are evidence of the panic they feel. The Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, all of them are meeting to try and figure out what they can do. Now, the media coverage is focusing on a recession. And the issue that they're saying is being discussed is how high to raise interest rates. 0.5 point, 0.75 point, 2 points, 5 points. And they're saying that this will be an attempt to calm the markets, to slow the growth to a manageable level. But this is not working because the reason is simple. It's not too much growth of an economy. It's too much growth of debt and of the speculative economy into the everything bubble, as opposed to physical economic growth, which you need. And you can't have physical economic growth without new credit. But the credit is all being pulled into the speculative bubble to hold up the artificial valuations on the financial instruments. So they have no solution. That's why markets are not being calmed. The figures that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2 days ago show the highest year-to-year level of inflation since 1981. Food up over 10%, with some areas of food 20, 30%, such as eggs, milk, flour, and so on. Energy costs are up over 34%. What are we hearing from the political leaders? It's Putin's fault. You can't afford gas? It's Putin's fault. Your teen daughter is pregnant? Blame Putin. Now, this, of course, is no answer. And what we're seeing is debt defaults that are looming across the board. In the so-called developing sectors, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Ukraine would be heading for default, except they're going to prop up Ukraine, even as they're adding huge volumes of new debt as a result of Zelensky's extensive and expensive weapons wish list, which he's now demanding that NATO provide. We see the stock indices plunging. That's an indication of the panic. For example, yesterday, the Standard & Poor's average was down 0.4%. 2 days ago, 3.9%. That drop on Monday wiped out $1.28 trillion of market value. And since January, the S&P is down 22%, which is technically the definition of a bear market. The Dow was down 0.5% yesterday. On January 4th of this year, the Dow was at its record high, 36,799. Today, or yesterday, it closed at 30,364. And the word among analysts is that we must now move to a, quote, harder and faster anti-inflation policy, by which they mean harder and higher interest rates. Now, we know that stock values have been decoupled from the real physical economy for some time. That's what has gone on since the 1971 decision to decouple the dollar from a gold reserve system. But the question is not so much the stock values, because that's just an indicator of how people are figuring out how to game the system and make some money. The real question is, where does credit go? Who gets credit? Is it going to go to the speculators or to the producers? Now, the problem is that raising rates may trigger a wave of defaults because many corporations are staying in business only because they can get very cheap credit from the Federal Reserve to keep rolling over their debt that they can't cover. There are zombie corporations. The definition of a zombie corporation is a company that's in business, that's not making enough profits to pay the interest on its debt, but has a line of credit from banks that don't want it to crash. Now, if you were to just let it crash, you have the danger of a chain reaction wave of defaults. This is what they confronted in 2008 when the mortgage-backed security bubble popped. Lehman was the first victim. But as the CEO of Lehman famously said, "What, you're letting us go, so now we're the schmuck?" Well, in fact, what happened within the day or two after the decision to let Lehman go under, it became clear that a whole series of other banks were in the same situation. And the decision was made to bail out the zombie investment banks. And this cost the economy something like $23 trillion in bailout funds. Now, it was the fear of a chain reaction collapse that led the Fed to adopt the endless bailout policy. Whereas we at the LaRouche movement were saying there should be no bailout, no bail-in, and no bail for the criminal speculators. But the result of the decision to go to an endless bailout was the debt bubbles grew to unsustainable levels. The corporate debt bubble that just increased enormously, astronomically, after September 2019 required the Federal Reserve to take over the repo markets, which previously had been run as a profitable measure by the banks. But the fear of default caused them to move out, and the Fed had to come in. And somewhere over $15 trillion since the last quarter of 2019 has been pumped into these same zombie corporations, so that we're in this situation of a perpetual rollover of an endless bailout. Now, the crisis is being used to impose the Great Reset. That is, to eliminate sovereignty of nations so that no nation can act against this endless bailout policy. And the endless bailout policy will result at some point in bailing out the bankrupt corporations, but squeezing every last drop of blood out of the population. So the legitimate question to ask is, are there leaders anywhere on the globe that are offering solutions? Now, here we can take a quick look at what is coming up in the next couple of days at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which will be addressed by Putin on the 17th. His spokesman, Peskov, gave an interview yesterday, and what Peskov said as in anticipation of Putin's address was that, quote, "We are seeing how all these restrictions and sanctions imposed against Russia are fueling up prices in the energy, food, and other sectors. We can see that the mistakes made by many countries are starting to manifest themselves in the evolving food crisis." Then he said, Putin's speech will be extremely important. He added, economies were taken hostage by politics, and politicians in many countries made a colossal number of mistakes amid the coronavirus. An ideal economic storm has been created. This is Jamie Dimon's metaphor of a hurricane is coming. Peskov continued, the mistakes have been aggravated by the economic war being waged on Russia. And Russia's too large a country for the economic war not to boomerang back on those unfriendly countries. Now, Russia has a different approach. They're investing in the physical economy. They're backing the ruble by gold, by oil, by fertilizer, by strategic metals, by timber. That's the way an economy should function. And there's discussion of trading different nations' currencies outside of the dollar system, where there are currencies that are backed by something physical. There's going to be a meeting of the BRICS nations, probably starting on June 24th, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And what are they discussing? The topic of their summit is foster high-quality BRICS partnership, usher in a new era for global development. And they're talking about using investment in real physical goods to uplift the people of the developing sector, as the Chinese have uplifted 800 plus million people from poverty with the China economic policy of investment in real physical goods and shutting down speculation. Now, you're told that's authoritarian. Well, no, that's the American system. The American system was based on the idea of making credit available to producers. If people want to speculate, it's their own business, but you don't bail them out. You don't sabotage the physical economy to bail out the parasites of the speculators. That's what the Chinese are doing. They're shutting down speculation to continue to invest in high-speed rail and advanced energy systems, and power development in third countries, and so on. That's what the Belt and Road Initiative is. And they're being attacked by that, supposedly for not having free market policies. Well, free market policies today means no sovereign control over investment in your own country. And it means the runaway shipping of goods, of industrial production to the poorest countries to take advantage of cheap labor and cheap raw materials, while shutting down industry and manufacturing and advanced agriculture in the so-called developed countries. This is why we have an inflation spiral and a collapse of the system. So maybe people in the United States should scratch their head when they see all these attacks on Russia and China. And then people who know that the Biden policy, the policies of the last presidents, have been part of the speculative bubble. Maybe these other countries know better than the United States. Because with all the indications of so-called wealth in the United States, more and more people are slipping into poverty. There's more homelessness, more desperation in the United States because the policies favor the speculators, not the producers. And if you do that, you have a growing number of unproductive people who are not being trained to produce real wealth, who fall by the wayside. And this is the problem in the West. This is the collapse of the system. So perhaps people should pay attention to what's going on in the BRICS countries. And definitely pay attention to what we're going to be talking about this Saturday and Sunday, about the need for global bankruptcy reorganization for a policy of peace and development. You can find this online conference at schillerinstitute.com, and I hope to see you there this weekend.